There's someone in your life right now who rehearses conversations with you that never actually happen. And the strange part is, you probably think they barely notice you. You've trained yourself to ignore certain signals because it feels safer that way. Safer to assume people are distracted, busy, uninterested. Safer to believe that if someone truly cared, they'd just say it clearly. But human beings are not clear when emotion becomes dangerous, especially when the feeling is real. And I need you to hear this carefully, because men miss this all the time. Sometimes the person who feels the deepest connection to you becomes the quietest around you. Not cold, not indifferent, quiet. There's a difference. Before we go deeper into this, if this already feels uncomfortably familiar, subscribe. Not because I need the number, but because some conversations arrive at the exact moment a person is finally ready to hear them. And I think this might be one of those moments for you. You know what's fascinating? Most people think love makes someone expressive, bold, obvious. Sometimes it does. But sometimes love does the exact opposite. It makes a person hyper-aware of themselves. Every word, every glance, every tiny shift in tone. Especially if they believe losing you would hurt more than never having you. That's when affection becomes restraint. And I think there's a woman connected to your life right now who's living inside that restraint every single day. Maybe you notice small things but dismiss them. The way she remembers details you forgot you told her. The way her energy changes when another woman gets your attention. Not dramatically, just subtly. Like she suddenly becomes quieter, slightly distant, almost like she's protecting herself from something she doesn't want visible. Or maybe she watches you when she thinks you're distracted. Not in a movie-like way. Real life is smaller than that. Real attraction hides in moments people barely notice. A pause before she responds to you. The way she rereads your messages. The way she acts completely normal around everyone else, but slightly careful around you. That carefulness matters more than men realize, because when a woman genuinely does not care, she relaxes. But when she feels emotionally exposed, her mind starts managing every interaction like it's carrying fragile glass. And honestly, I think some of you watching this have completely misunderstood the woman who feels the strongest about you. You assumed confidence means honesty. You assumed silence means absence. No, sometimes silence is overload, especially when someone has convinced themselves you either don't feel the same, or worse, you could. That second one tears people apart, because uncertainty is psychologically exhausting. Human beings can survive rejection faster than ambiguity. Rejection closes a door. Ambiguity leaves it half open at 2 a.m. And there's something painfully intimate about watching someone every day while pretending your feelings are manageable. That's what people don't talk about. The performance, the emotional self-control. The way someone smiles normally while internally monitoring every interaction with you like it could accidentally reveal too much. You may have seen flashes of it without understanding what you were looking at. She asks about your life, then pulls back suddenly. She seems emotionally present one day, distant the next. You thought inconsistency meant disinterest. But emotionally overwhelmed people often become inconsistent because they're fighting themselves in real time. Part of her wants proximity. Part of her is terrified of what proximity will expose. And if she's been hurt before? If she learns somewhere in her life that vulnerability becomes humiliation, then this feeling for you is not exciting to her. It's terrifying. Because now every interaction carries risk. Not just romantic risk, emotional exposure. See, men often think attraction is about pursuit, but for many women, real attachment feels more like losing emotional control quietly while trying to appear composed. That's why the signs are rarely loud. They leak out sideways. In timing, attention, emotional sensitivity, tiny changes in behavior nobody else would notice. And here's the part that may bother you a little. You might actually feel this connection too, not fully, not consciously, but enough to sense tension when she's around. Enough to notice her absence differently than other people's absence. Enough to replay certain conversations later and wonder why they stayed in your head longer than they should have. Because emotional energy between two people is strange like that. Your body notices things before your logic catches up. And when someone quietly loves you, truly loves you, it changes the emotional atmosphere between you, even if neither person says a word. Sometimes, especially then, there's a specific kind of loneliness that happens when someone falls for you quietly. And most men never see it. Because from the outside, she still functions normally. She goes to work, responds to messages, laughs at things, carries conversations. Maybe she even dates other people for a while just to prove to herself she can move on. But internally, you become this constant emotional interruption she cannot fully switch off. And I don't think men understand how exhausting that can become for someone who's trying very hard to stay emotionally disciplined. Especially women who learned early in life not to need too much. Those women are dangerous to themselves emotionally because they become experts at concealment. You'll never catch them making dramatic confessions. No, they become quieter, more observant, more emotionally strategic. They'll convince themselves they're being irrational for caring this much. They'll tell themselves, it's probably one-sided. He probably doesn't think about me like that. I need to calm down. Meanwhile, your smallest actions start affecting their nervous system in ways they don't even want to admit. One delayed reply changes her mood more than it should. One warm interaction with you stays in her mind all night. One emotionally distant moment from you can make her withdraw for days just to regain control of herself. And what's painful is, she probably hates that this is happening. Because mature people don't enjoy feeling emotionally dependent on uncertainty. That's the part social media never captures correctly. Real attraction isn't always exciting. Sometimes it's inconvenient, disruptive, embarrassingly sincere. Sometimes she's sitting there trying to focus on something important while her mind keeps replaying the exact tone in your voice when you said her name. Not because she's weak, because emotional attachment is physical, neurological. Your brain starts assigning meaning to someone before your pride can stop it. And if she senses even the slightest possibility that you might feel something too, that's when things become emotionally dangerous. Because hope changes behavior. Quietly. She starts noticing things she didn't before. Your patterns, your moods, your energy shifts. She can tell when you're emotionally off, even when other people can't. And this is where men accidentally break hearts without realizing it. Because sometimes you think you're being casual, while someone else is emotionally studying you for reassurance. You say something careless, disappear emotionally for a few days, act warm one moment and detached the next because you're stressed, distracted, overwhelmed with life. But to someone quietly attached to you, that inconsistency becomes emotional confusion. Not because she's irrational, because attachment magnifies meaning. And the hardest part? She probably feels ashamed for how deeply she feels affected by you. That shame creates even more silence. So instead of expressing what she feels, she manages it privately. That's why some women become oddly formal around the man they genuinely care about, almost controlled, like they're constantly trying not to reveal the depth of what's happening underneath. And if you've ever felt a strange emotional tension around a woman who technically hasn't done anything obvious, there's usually a reason. Human beings leak emotion, not through speeches, through atmosphere. You can feel when someone is overthinking your presence. You can feel when eye contact lasts half a second too long before they look away. You can feel when someone becomes subtly self-conscious around you. That energy doesn't come from nowhere. And here's something even more complicated. Sometimes she pulls away not because her feelings disappeared, but because they became too strong to carry casually. A lot of men misread withdrawal. You think, she lost interest. Maybe, but sometimes a woman distances herself because staying emotionally close to you without clarity is beginning to hurt her psychologically. Especially if she senses you're emotionally unavailable or unaware. There's a grief in that situation that almost nobody talks about. The grief of being emotionally connected to someone who doesn't fully realize what they mean to you. So she starts protecting herself. Replies become shorter, energy becomes calmer. She stops reaching out first, not to manipulate you, to survive her own emotions. And the tragedy is, men often notice the withdrawal only after it's already painful for her. That's when you suddenly feel her absence. The warmth is reduced. The attentiveness softens. Something unspoken disappears from the space between you, and you can't quite explain why it affects you, but it does. Because whether you admitted it or not, you had become emotionally used to being quietly loved by her. That's a hard truth. Sometimes people don't recognize someone's feelings until the emotional oxygen they provided is gone. And when that happens, the silence between two people becomes unbearably loud. You know what makes this even more complicated? The person quietly in love with you may not even want a relationship right now. That's the part nobody prepares men for. Because deep emotional attachment and emotional readiness are not always the same thing. A woman can care about you intensely and still be terrified of what being close to you would actually demand from her emotionally. Especially if she's spent years surviving by staying emotionally self-contained. I've seen this so many times. A woman meets a man who unexpectedly reaches something soft inside her she thought was long buried, and instead of moving closer, she starts internally panicking. Not visibly, quietly. Because now she has something to lose. And once a person feels that, their entire emotional system changes. Suddenly your opinion matters more than it should. Your distance hurts more than it should. Your attention feels comforting in a way that scares her a little, because she realizes how quickly human beings can become emotionally significant to each other. That realization alone can make someone retreat. You have to understand, some people associate love with instability, not consciously, but emotionally. Maybe affection in her past came with inconsistency, abandonment, criticism, betrayal, emotional unpredictability. So now when she starts genuinely caring about someone, her nervous system doesn't interpret it as safety, it interprets it as risk, which creates this painful contradiction inside her. Part of her wants to be seen by you, the other part wants to disappear before you can hurt her. And if you've ever felt confused by a woman who seemed emotionally drawn to you one moment, then strangely guarded the next, you may have been witnessing that internal war in real time. Not manipulation, fear mixed with desire. That combination makes people act emotionally complicated. And honestly, I think some men underestimate how deeply women can feel things they never verbalize. A woman can spend months trying to reduce the importance of a man in her mind while accidentally building emotional rituals around him. Checking if he viewed something, noticing when his energy changes, thinking about texting him, then deciding not to, rehearsing honesty, then swallowing it at the last second. You think silence means nothing is happening. Meanwhile, she's carrying entire conversations with you in her head that you'll never hear. That's what makes hidden love so psychologically consuming. There's no release, no resolution, just emotional build-up. And eventually, it starts leaking into small moments she can't fully control anymore. Like the way her face softens when you're vulnerable, or the way she becomes unusually attentive when you're struggling emotionally. That's another thing men miss constantly. A woman who quietly loves you often reveals herself most clearly when you're hurting. Because her emotional instincts override her self-protection for a moment. She wants to comfort you before she remembers she's trying not to care this much. And if you pay attention closely enough, you'll notice it. Not through dramatic declarations, through tenderness, subtle tenderness, the kind people struggle to fake consistently. And maybe this is the uncomfortable question sitting underneath all of this. Why hasn't she said anything? Sometimes it's because she genuinely believes the timing is wrong. Sometimes she thinks your life is too complicated. Sometimes she senses you're emotionally unavailable, even if you don't realize you are. And sometimes she's waiting for evidence that it's emotionally safe to be honest with you. That word matters. Safe. Not guaranteed, not perfect. Safe. Because emotionally intelligent women are not usually afraid of rejection itself. They're afraid of humiliation, misreading things, becoming emotionally exposed to someone who treats their vulnerability casually. You'd be shocked how many women carry memories of finally opening up to someone, only to feel foolish afterward. That changes people. After enough emotional disappointment, some women stop expressing love directly. Not because they stopped feeling deeply, because they learned concealment feels safer than uncertainty. So instead of saying, "I think about you constantly," they ask if you got home safe. Instead of saying, "I miss you," They send something random that reminded them of you. Instead of admitting, "You matter to me more than I planned." They become strangely emotional over tiny changes in your behavior and don't even fully understand why themselves. And somewhere inside her, there's probably a quiet exhaustion growing, because hiding real feelings requires continuous emotional management. Every interaction becomes calculated. How long should she reply? Was that message too warm? Did she reveal too much? Should she pull back now? That mental tension wears people down over time, especially when the connection feels emotionally unfinished. And maybe that's why you're watching this right now, because part of you already senses there's something unspoken happening between you and someone. Something emotionally alive beneath the surface. Something neither of you fully knows how to touch without changing everything. There's a moment in situations like this that most men completely miss. It doesn't look dramatic. There's no confession, no confrontation, no obvious turning point. It's quieter than that. It's when she starts becoming careful about how much of herself she lets you see. Not distant in the obvious sense, but edited. Like she's slowly removing the parts of her that might give her away. And if you've ever been around someone doing that, you can feel it, even if you don't have words for it. The conversation still flows. She still smiles, still responds, but something inside the interaction becomes slightly restrained. Not less interested, more controlled. And that control is never random. It usually means she's trying to manage how emotionally visible she becomes in your presence. Because at some point, caring about you stopped feeling casual. It started feeling like something she has to contain. And that's a very specific kind of emotional pressure. You know what it feels like for her? It's like standing too close to a fire you don't want to admit you're warming your hands at. Because if you admit it, you might not move away. And if you don't move away, you might get burned. So she stays in this middle space, close enough to feel you, far enough to protect herself. And that tension, it builds over time. But here's where it gets psychologically interesting. Men often interpret this kind of emotional control as loss of interest. But internally, it's often the opposite. It's heightened awareness. Because when someone means more to you, you don't become freer around them. You become more intentional. You start noticing your own behavior more than usual. You replay conversations. You question your tone. You try to predict how they perceived you. And all of that creates emotional fatigue. So what looks like detachment is often just someone trying not to lose themselves in feelings they didn't plan for. And I think that's what makes this dynamic so painful for both sides. Because while she is managing herself, you might be trying to interpret her. And neither of you is fully speaking the same emotional language anymore. There's another layer to this that's harder to admit. Sometimes she becomes emotionally distant, not because she stopped caring, but because caring became too visible in her own behavior. Have you ever had someone in your life who could read you too easily? Someone whose presence makes you more aware of your own emotional state? That's what she might feel about you. Like you've become emotionally significant enough that you can influence her mood without meaning to. And that realization changes everything for her. Because it removes the illusion of control. And people don't like losing emotional control. So she starts adjusting herself. Not to manipulate you, but to stabilize herself. Shorter replies are not always rejection. Sometimes they're regulation. Slowing things down internally because her feelings are moving faster than her ability to handle them. And there's a very specific kind of sadness in that, because she might genuinely enjoy talking to you and still choose to step back from it. Not because you did something wrong, but because the emotional intensity between you has reached a point where it no longer feels simple. And simplicity is something people protect more than they admit. You also need to understand something else here. When someone quietly loves you, they rarely experience only happiness. There's often anxiety woven into it, because love without clarity creates constant interpretation. Every word becomes data, every silence becomes meaning, every change in tone becomes a question. And that internal analysis never fully stops. So even when she's away from you, she's not fully away from you. She's still processing you. Still replaying things, still wondering what you meant, what you felt, what you didn't say. And that's exhausting in a way that doesn't look visible from the outside. From your perspective, nothing is happening. From hers, something is always happening. And over time, that imbalance creates emotional pressure. Because she's carrying emotional weight that isn't being balanced by clarity. And clarity is the one thing that could calm everything down. But clarity requires risk. And risk is exactly what she's trying to manage. So she stays in that careful space again, not moving forward, not fully leaving, just holding herself together in the middle of something she can't fully name yet. And if you're honest with yourself, there's probably a part of you that feels that tension too, even if you've been trying not to think about it. There's a point where quiet love stops feeling romantic and starts feeling like pressure. Not because the feeling is wrong, but because it has nowhere to go. And when emotions don't have an outlet, they don't disappear. They turn inward. I want you to imagine her in a moment you'll never see. She's not thinking about you in a poetic way, not daydreaming in a soft, cinematic sense. It's more repetitive than that, almost intrusive sometimes. She's doing something normal, answering emails, walking somewhere, sitting in traffic, and suddenly you're there in her thoughts again. Not invited, not planned, just present. And she has to make a decision every time that happens. Do I follow this thought, or do I push it away? Most people don't realize how much energy it takes to constantly push something away that feels emotionally meaningful. Because the mind doesn't like unfinished connections. It circles back, again and again. And if she's someone who values emotional control, she probably gets frustrated with herself for it. Not because she feels wrong for liking you, but because she didn't agree to how much space you started taking up inside her. That's the part that quietly unsettles people. When someone becomes emotionally significant without permission, and I don't mean that in a dramatic way, it can happen through something as simple as consistent attention, a certain tone in your voice, the way you listen without interrupting, the way you make her feel slightly more seen than she expected. Small things. That's usually how it starts. And then one day she realizes she's thinking about you in moments that have nothing to do with you. That's when people usually start pulling back internally, because now the feeling isn't just affection, it's attachment forming without structure. And attachment without structure feels unsafe. So she tries to reduce it. She becomes more careful with interactions, more measured, more aware of how much she's giving emotionally. But feelings don't always cooperate with boundaries. They leak. And when they leak, they show up in contradictions. She says less, but listens more carefully. She acts casual, but remembers details you forgot you said. She distances herself, but still notices when you're not the same. And you might interpret that as inconsistency, but internally, it's consistency trying to survive emotional overload. There's also something else happening that she might not even fully admit to herself. She might be waiting. Not passively, but cautiously. Waiting for you to make something clearer, because uncertainty is heavy when you're the one feeling more than you've expressed. And when someone feels more but says less, they often start looking for signals. Not because they want to play games, but because clarity feels like relief. A single, honest moment from you could quiet a lot of internal noise for her. But if that moment never comes, she stays in interpretation mode. And interpretation is where emotional exhaustion lives. Because every interaction becomes something she has to decode alone. And over time, that creates distance that isn't emotional loss, it's emotional fatigue. That's when she might start acting like she's fine, more stable, less reactive, less visibly affected. But that doesn't always mean the feeling is gone. Sometimes it means she's learned how to carry it quietly without letting it disrupt her life as much. And here's the part that can be hard to hear. People don't always leave because they stop feeling. Sometimes they leave because they can't keep feeling without direction, because caring without clarity eventually becomes self-neglect. And at some point, she has to choose herself again, even if something about you still stays in her mind longer than she wants to admit. So she pulls back. Not always fully, but enough to protect her peace. Enough to stop the emotional bleeding she can't explain to anyone else. And from the outside, that can look like loss of interest, but internally, it can be the exact opposite of indifference. It can be restraint at its limit. And if you've ever felt a shift in someone like that, where things didn't end, they just softened and faded, You were probably watching someone choose emotional survival over emotional uncertainty, and that choice doesn't erase what was felt, it just contains it. Quietly, carefully, somewhere she doesn't have to keep paying for it every day. There's something I need to say carefully here, because this is where most stories like this either become unhealthy or finally become clear. Not every strong emotional connection is a hidden love story waiting to be completed. Sometimes it's attraction, sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's projection. Sometimes it's two people who feel something real, but never reach the same level of emotional availability at the same time. And if you're listening to this thinking, so she loves me in silence and I just missed it, I need you to slow that interpretation down a little, because the truth is more human than that. If someone is quietly in love with you, what you're usually seeing isn't certainty. It's signals filtered through fear, experience, personality, and context. It's not a fixed narrative. It's a living, unstable emotional state that changes depending on their day, your behavior, and their own internal world. That's why it can feel so intense, but also so unclear. And here's the part that matters most. Even if someone does care about you deeply, real love in real life doesn't survive on interpretation alone. It needs communication, mutual emotional presence, some level of honesty that allows both people to stop guessing. Without that, what grows isn't love in its healthiest form. It's tension, anticipation, emotional uncertainty that feels meaningful but slowly drains both people in different ways. And I think if I'm speaking to you honestly, the real question isn't, does she love me in silence? It's something more grounded than that. Do I actually know how I show up in someone's emotional world? Because sometimes men become so focused on reading signs that they stop noticing their own role in the dynamic. You might be more important to her than you realize, yes, but you might also be less aware of how your inconsistency, your distance, your silence, or even your own emotional guardedness affects the space between you. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Because every emotionally charged connection has two nervous systems inside it, two interpretations, two sets of fears, two sets of hopes that don't always align. And when there's no clarity between them, both people start building private stories. Stories that feel real, but aren't always shared. That's where most emotional confusion comes from, not lack of feeling, lack of confirmation. So if there's something I want you to take away from everything I've said, it's this. If someone matters to you in a real way, not imagined, not romanticized, but real, then the goal isn't to decode them endlessly, it's to move toward clarity in some form, even if that clarity is uncomfortable. Because silence can feel powerful, but it's not always honest. And emotional distance can feel mysterious, but it's not always meaningful. Sometimes it's just two people waiting for the other one to make something simpler, and maybe that's where you are right now. Not in a story of hidden love, but in a moment that's asking for something more grounded than guessing. Something real. Something said out loud, even if it changes everything. Because at the end of the day, the human heart doesn't actually want perfect mystery. It wants to stop wondering.